Hi, I'm Jackie with Military Saves, where we're motivating the entire military community to save money, reduce debt, and build wealth. And it is Military Appreciation Month. And today we are focusing on military caregivers. We've got a very special guest today, Patti Katter, who is a friend of mine, but also, as I like to describe her, she's a positive light, but also a force of nature. Patti definitely makes things happen. I'm very excited to chat with her today. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Patti.
Thank you. It's so good to see you again.
You too. It's been quite a while. Well, I feel like I need to give you a formal introduction because you really have done some incredible work for our military community. And I'd like to share this with everyone. And then we're going to tell a little bit about your story, about your foray into becoming an advocate for the military and veteran communities. So, Patti Katter is the wife of a combat injured veteran who has helped her husband navigate the arduous journey through the military healthcare system to find the treatment he needs. Patti has met with presidents and government officials to positively change policies for military veterans and their families. Wow. Patti is a member and advocate of multiple nonprofit organizations, a contributing author of 3 books, and is also a talk show personality. She hosts Wake Up with Patti Katter, which is sponsored by Heroes Media Group. Patti's personal mantra is overcoming trials with triumph, and she has not only applied this to her own life and family, but is also the driving belief that she has used for over a decade to inspire others as they face life's challenges and seek personal growth, which I love. So I love that you are just fueled by this. You are strong, you are positive, you keep going, and you're not just keeping that for yourself. You are here to help others. So Patti, thank you again. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yes. So I guess I'd like to go back to the very, very beginning. I did mention that your husband was injured in the line of duty. So let's talk about what life was like prior to that. Can you tell me a little bit about what your relationship was like and what your lifestyle was like before he sustained his injury?
Yeah, absolutely. So I met Ken. Oh my goodness, we were young. I was not even 21 yet. And he was just getting out of the Marine Corps when I met him. And he is a little bit older than I am. He was very grounded. He had strong work ethics and great family background. We met and kind of clicked. And before you know it, we ended up getting married, had a family, and everything was going really well. Ken became a police officer. He served as a police officer in Michigan for several years, about a decade before he ended up joining the Army. He Our life was amazing. We had 30 acres. We had a huge house. It was over 4,000 square foot. And life was great. It was like almost like a picket fence, except our yard was too big to have a fence around it. So our kids were great. Our police family was fantastic. But we had a couple of nephews who had joined the military, and one of them was injured while serving in Iraq. And it kind of sparked something in my husband where he wanted to join the military again. It was post 9/11, it was 2005. And we kind of talked about it a little bit. And I've never been one to hold anybody back from their dreams or what they want to do. So we talked about it, and he ended up joining the Army post 9/11. He wanted to go active duty, and the only way to do that would have been to join the Army because the Marines, he missed the cutoff age unless he were to go into the reserves. And so that's how he ended up in the Army.
Okay, wow, that's a big deal. So the fact that you made that decision as a couple and you were supportive, because I'm sure you probably had some reservations. I know I did. I was married before he joined the military, and that there were a lot of very challenging conversations because I didn't know what to expect. But it is difficult because you think, well, this is something they're called to do. This is very important, and you do want to be that supportive partner. So I think that's fascinating that he served in 2 different branches and was a police officer. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
he was on the dive team too for the sheriff's department. So he was very well connected in the is in a whole in the heroes community, if you would.
That was the word I just had in my head. Is he just sounds like he's a born hero. If he's just there to serve and to save people, I think that says a lot about Ken, and it's really admirable. Wow. Okay. So, um, outside of your relationship, once you became a military spouse, I know that's an entirely different lifestyle from civilian. I'm not really sure how it compares to being a police spouse. I'm not sure. I'm sure there's overlap, but I'm just curious, what was your life like when you first did become a military spouse?
Well, it was pretty different because since I was young, I've always loved journaling and writing, and I wrote for a newspaper and when I was a teenager in high school, and took theater classes. And I was a police reservist myself for 4 years in Michigan. So I was always raised pretty independent, and I was always very adventurous. So once Ken joined the Army, I just looked at it as another adventure or something else to go on, I guess. Kind of like a roller coaster ride I didn't expect. So it was different for sure. I ended up staying back in Michigan, and I sold our house. And while Ken went to training, he became 82nd Airborne uh, Cav Scout, and that was similar to what he did in the Marines as far as just the jumping out of airplanes part. He was in Force Recon when he was in the Marine Corps. He was always very high paced as well, a diver on the Sheriff's Department. He used to bust a lot of drug dealers when he was a police officer. So when he went into the Army, the adventure part kind of stayed the same, if not escalated for sure. But I liked the camaraderie that the spouses had. And it was, even though something like your neighbor could bother you, at the end of the day, you still know that you're there for each other. So I sold our house. We moved to Fort Bragg and lived on post for a year, which was completely different. If you could imagine living on 30 acres in the country and then going right smack in a duplex, basically. That was quite different, but
Right.
exciting.
Yeah, well, and it sounds like your husband also has that pull towards that like adrenaline rush. I mean, he's definitely out there doing the adventurous things if he's jumping out of planes, if he's diving. So that does sound really exciting, and I like that you looked at it as an adventure. I think that's a wonderful perspective. And we never really know what we're getting into when we become military spouses. So I think if you go in with that positivity and eyes wide open, and you're making those connections, that's a really great start. So okay, then sounds like things are going really well until they weren't. Can you tell me a little bit about the story of when things did change for you? What happened when Ken sustained his injury?
Mhm. So everything was going great in Army life about the first year because he was just training a lot.
Mhm.
When he was a police officer, he wasn't home a whole lot. I mean, of course, he came home in the evenings, but he was working a lot. He was in court a lot. So I was used to pretty much, taking care of the kids and taking care of the house and all that. So that part didn't really change. But I think when things started to click a little bit more, like this is a lot different than just being a police officer wife, is when he went to help with Hurricane Katrina cleanup. So that was very shortly after he had joined the military again. And it was different because, you look on the news and there's bodies floating down the river, or, there's like, it was very a different type of quote unquote adventure that he was on. And it started becoming more dangerous, I guess. He, I remember taking one of my kids to the emergency room, and when we walked in, there's all these soldiers sitting in the emergency room, broken up in pieces. And I was like, what happened? They had just jumped out of airplanes. So during their training, all these guys are getting hurt from airborne operation training. And so those things were a little bit eye-opening, but it wasn't until Ken deployed on a 15-month deployment to Iraq that things
Ooh,
started getting very real.
15 months.
Mhm.
And how many kids did you have, Patty?
3.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. And they were little and it was hard. I remember the day that he left, especially my 2 little ones just cry. And, at bedtime, they didn't want to sleep in their own bed. So my bed became the family bed.
Yeah.
um, So that was hard. One of the neighbor kids down the road told my two younger kids, "Oh, your dad went to war. He's going to die because that's what happens in war." So
Oh
it was like the
gosh.
first day they were told that, by their friends. So that was difficult. Of course, the parents would have died if they knew. Like they would have been like, "What are you saying?"
Yeah.
Because I'm sure they didn't know. They were great people, but
Mhm.
those things were at the very beginning. So Ken deployed to Iraq in August of 2005. And shortly after, in November of 2005, his truck commander was killed in front of him. My best friend that I had growing up in junior high school, her husband was killed. Her husband was not in my husband's unit. It just was a coincidence that that happened. So Ken ended up coming home for R&R I believe it was the very end of November, beginning of December, somewhere in that time frame. Right away, he had R&R to go to two funerals in Washington, D.C., and then to go back for another year to Iraq.
Oh my gosh.
So it was definitely trying.
How I can't even imagine processing that. I mean, first off, you're married, you changed this lifestyle. He's away for training, then he's away helping with the hurricane, then he goes on a deployment. I mean, you probably thought, okay, we really don't have him home as much as I thought. And then to know he's in such dangerous situations and seeing people pass, like that would hit home. And I could see how you would think, huh, what kind of adventure did we sign up for? Um,
I tried not to think of it that way.
yeah.
I was always raised to try super hard to find the positive in everything.
Yeah.
And I give my grandma credit for that. She raised me that way. We're pretty stubborn and thinking, like, okay, we made this decision. It must have been for a reason.
Yes.
And something's going to come out of this. I don't know what in the world is going to come out of this, but something. And it was definitely trying. There was not a month that went by that my husband didn't lose somebody in his unit that he
Oh,
knew. And those times were definitely hard. I helped with the red line calls. There was a little group of us that did red line calls. And for those of you watching this who don't know what that is, basically when somebody in the unit passes, after their families are notified, then the spouses and families of the unit need to be notified properly. So I was doing that and trying to keep busy on the home front, helping the families who were losing their loved ones and trying not to think about what it would be like to lose Ken. But there was a time, probably about, gosh, April 2007. Actually, I said that he deployed in 2006. He deployed in, August 2006. Sorry. It was around April 2007 that we lost 9 of our Cav scouts from the 573, and it was in his unit. It was a different company though.
mm,
So my husband had transferred over to Charlie Company, and Bravo Company had been hit very hard, and they lost 9. And it was on the news. My mom, who lived next door, she came over knocking on the door. Did you see the news? Nobody knew what platoon it was though that
ah,
had been hit. So I just knew it was 573. I knew that was Ken's guys. And the last I knew, he was at the schoolhouse that had been bombed. And I didn't know that the night before he had left, or close to that, if not the night before, he had left to go on a refit. And I had no idea he wasn't at that location at that time because
oh my
they went to
gosh.
go get more ammo. So I remember that was probably the time where I started thinking, he's not coming home. He probably is not coming home. And I just kind of started prepping my mind that he may not be coming home.
I'm sorry you had to go through that, and even more sorry for the spouses who did lose their husbands. I'm friends with a couple of Gold Star spouses, and they they said that it was very difficult because the community wasn't always open arms for them because they represented their worst nightmare. And I thought, oh gosh, so when I hear that you're there and you're making the calls and you're supporting and you're pushing past the challenges of holding down the home front with 3 young kids, you're there supporting your husband from a distance. It just really says a lot about your character. And I just think it's amazing that you were able to stay strong because those are very uncertain times. So All right.
Lots
Ken
of questions.
unfortunately did sustain an injury. Can
Mhm.
you talk a little bit about that and
Yes.
how that changed things for you?
Yeah. So actually, he was injured on May 28th of 2007. Believe it or not, I did not get a phone call from him. I did not get a phone call from his unit. They had been to the point where they had lost too many were being injured. I guess they just didn't have time to contact me. It was a couple of days later. He called and he's like, "Hey, so I guess you heard what happened to me." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" He was in Iraq still. He did stay there the remainder of his deployment. An IED went off underneath the seat of his vehicle,
Oh gosh.
which he did lose consciousness for a short time. And then the vehicle in front of him were pulling him out, and they hit another one on the same day. He did have blood coming out of his ears, so the medic gave him a couple of days off, and he ended up going back out in the field.
Oh,
So I remember there were a couple of times that we had talked on the phone that he, told me about a couple weird things, like he was on the roof of a building and one of our guys was accidentally shooting at him. And um, I remember just wondering, like later a couple of years later, like, geez, I wonder if he was in the right place or maybe he was in the wrong spot. I don't know. But basically, I didn't realize how bad his injury was until he came home, and that was in October. So he was there that entire time. We did not talk on the phone very often. They used satellite phones then, and you could only talk for a few minutes at a time because they didn't want the enemy to intercept any phone calls while they were out there.
wow.
So we only spoke for a couple minutes at a time. I only got a couple of letters, and they were really short. And so it wasn't until October 23rd, 2007, he came home. And there was a big ceremony. The kids were excited. My parents were there. My parents did live next door to us. So they were very involved in our lives. And it wasn't until that day that he came home and we had eaten dinner, and he did not remember eating dinner. It was a couple hours later, and he's like starving. He's like, I don't, what are we eating? And we're like, we just ate. We had dinner together as a family. My parents were even here. And
Mhm.
he didn't remember that. So I thought he had just like jet lag or something. And then that night he had a seizure. And I realized there was something going on. I just didn't know what. So I told him that I literally told him, which is a change, first of all, that he needed to talk to somebody, his chain of command, a doctor, somebody, something's going on. You need to talk to someone. At first, he was really apprehensive because he loved his job. He loved doing what he was doing, but he had a seizure and he couldn't remember eating. Those are kind of big
Yeah.
things. So not very long after, he did go to a doctor and they diagnosed him right away with a brain injury, which I had no idea what in the world I was in store for. It was so new, as far as even the military diagnosing brain injuries back then. So his primary care doctor sent him over to a neurologist at Fort Bragg, Dr. Solomon, and Dr. Solomon and his team gave Ken almost 3 years of cognitive and occupational therapy. Um, Also, a short time after he had seen the neurologist asked him, "Why are you standing like this?" And he had his shoulders up a lot. He would always walk around kind of with his shoulders up. And Ken said, "Well, my neck has been hurting ever since the blast, but I didn't have any time to address it. And besides that, other friends have had far worse happen to them." So
Oh, yeah.
the neurologist sent him for an MRI, and shortly after, it was just within a few days, they sent him to Walter Reed to have emergency neck surgery. He had a couple of bone discs in his neck, and he had to have it fused. So it just kind of started unwinding from there. Um, he was sent over to the transition battalion, the Warrior Transition Battalion, and was strictly there just for medical care for, like I said, almost 3 years, which was almost an unheard of back then. They never kept somebody in the military that long for medical care. So I was glad that they did do that.
Yeah, Absolutely. Were you the one taking him to the appointments?
Yes, he could not drive at all for almost 3 years. So
Oh, Patty.
that that was challenging too. My kids were in school and my mom had cancer. And so my dad was trying to take care of my mom. And here I am with the kids trying to get them back and forth to school. The post was almost an hour back and forth to where we lived. And so I ended up pulling the kids out of school and homeschooled them because of our crazy schedule with all of Ken's doctor appointments.
Yeah.
And they homeschooled in many doctor offices throughout the years.
I think that's a wonderful solution, and it's amazing that you were able to take that on, but it did sound like that flexibility is what your situation needed.
We really did. I couldn't get back to the school soon enough to pick them up from school. So otherwise I would have had to find, somebody to try to pick them up and then help them with their homework. So it was just easier for me to take them out of school and to homeschool them while Ken was getting his either cognitive therapy or he had so many different things, vestibular therapy. There's a lot that comes with a brain injury that I've learned over time that you don't realize. So his balance was off. He couldn't even write his name. He had a hard time reading. Just a lot of different things.
That must have been really difficult. I mean, obviously for him, because just hearing him say, oh, well, other people had worse, like, I'm sure he internalized a lot and thought, well, I'm still here. I'm alive. I came home. But that doesn't mean he didn't need extra support. And I'm so glad that he was able to get, that treatment for 3 years. That really is incredible and unheard of. But you were definitely his rock. I don't see how he could have navigated that without you. So kudos to you. I'm sure that was really, really trying.
It was. One of the biggest things I learned, everybody, is if you're in that situation right now,
Yeah.
whether maybe you're caring for somebody who's still active duty and you're trying to make sure that you're going to the appointments with them, make sure you collect all of the medical documents as you go also. Sometimes those things are lost if you don't.
Right.
um, so we have totes full of Ken's medical records from when he was wounded and or from the time, actually, yes, the time he was wounded. They write up a medical statement. His medic wrote that up while he was still in Iraq. And throughout the entire process, from all of the different specialists, make sure you do save all of those records because you can go back someday and either reflect or sometimes you might need those to remember, like what medications was he on, what worked, what didn't work, things
Right.
like that.
Excellent. So it sounds like your life, once you became a military spouse, definitely became very challenging. Your days were filled with the kids and holding down the home front, and then you became a caregiver for your husband on top of everything. And I'm sorry to hear about your mother with the cancer, because usually you'd think, oh well, I can just rely on my parents. The grandparents will help with homework, and it just sounds like you were a one woman show, and it's just impressive that you managed to keep pushing forward, and I'm glad that you did. So how did he eventually ended up getting medically retired from the military? Can you discuss that a little bit, and what was that impact on the finances? Because I'm sure it sounds like Ken would have just stayed career military for the duration if he could, just from his personality. I might be wrong, but um, suddenly your plans had changed drastically. So what did that look like, and how did that impact your family?
It was crazy. It was like, so those who've had our tornado warnings, our hurricane warnings, that was it.
Mm,
um, so one thing I do want to point out is my kids helped too. Um, and during that transition of him getting ready to retire a couple months before he retired, actually, oh, even before that, the Army had something called AW2. And Juan, he was the AW2 representative at Fort Bragg, who I'm still in contact with. He was a huge help during that time because he made sure that like Ken's paperwork on his transition out was being done correctly, and that we would have a smooth transition between the military and the VA system. And thankfully, when you medically retire, you're able to keep TRICARE, which is very, very important. So if you're out there listening and you might be facing a med board, I think it's very important if you can medically retire versus just having a medical discharge, do it, or look into it to see if you qualify, because that will help you carry your health insurance for yourself and your family. So that was big. So we had the seamless transition as far as financially, we were going to be stable. But you get into this where you don't get the pay raises, you don't get promotions anymore after, you've been wounded and after you medically retire. I mean, it pretty much stays stagnant. And so the first few years, it was okay. Like we were just kind of taking it day by day. We didn't know with Ken's health, there was a lot changing with his health, and there still is. I mean, he was only in his 30s when he joined the Army, and now he's in his 50s. So the age even, so you have the injuries that are sustained and that are going to haunt you. And I say haunt, they're going to linger with you for your entire life. Like the brain injury, it doesn't just go away. There's tactics that you can learn to deal with it. The person who has the head injury and the person who lives with the person with the head injury. But a lot of times, there's still going to be issues that come up because of those injuries and the post-traumatic stress that our men and women have in combat. And it kind of trickles into the family, and the family learns better ways to deal with things. So financially, it's like, do you want to always rely on just this medical retirement or disability? For me, no. And I've been involved in a lot of support groups for caregivers. I actually led the groups. I've not really participated in them because I I am a little bit older than some of the other spouses that were dealing with the injuries back when we started dealing with it, like years ago, over a decade ago. So I kind of felt obligated to take that stance and to educate myself on the different injuries, what kind of resources are out there, and I take action instead of sitting back in a recliner. I just am not that kind of person.
I love that. So, did you feel pressured to, in addition to doing this volunteer work, did you feel pressured to go get a job as well? And if so, how did you fit that in with everything else happening?
Well, I have tried that, but honestly, for me, I am pretty resourceful, so I decided to make my own job.
I love that. Good.
um, and it fits into my schedule. So one thing I have definitely learned through this entire process is that you can work for somebody else and you will abide by their schedule, or you can create something yourself, be your own boss on your own terms, and do something that you're passionate about and that you love. And that's what works for me. And it can really work for almost any situation. You just have to figure out the time schedule, and you have to really structure yourself too.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I think entrepreneurship is a wonderful option for military spouses, for veterans as well, because the flexibility. But a lot of us have that. Those skills are just very adaptable. We're very structured. We know how to stay on top of things, and it's just very good. Like veterans come with a lot of discipline, which can be very beneficial. And we were just talking last month for Military Saves Month that it is important for military spouses to also have something for themselves or their own savings. And this is actually a really good example. If you feel that you're reliant solely on your spouse's finances and things happen, how can you be prepared for that? So we did recommend talking with your spouse with the what ifs. And I know it's not always a fun conversation to have, but if you prepare early, you can have some sort of contingency plan or emergency savings or something, just so you don't find yourself in a situation and think, well, now what? The fact that you are resourceful and stubborn, I think have absolutely been assets to you. But I feel like, well, I want to also hear like what happened. What was the catalyst? What was the moment where you said, you know what, something needs to be said or done or changed, and I'm the one to help bring this change to the fore? Because you've met with presidents. That's incredible. So I really want to hear how you got to this point.
Basically, when Ken was in the Warrior Transition Battalion, I noticed that he was having a hard time with one of his doctors. And it was because the doctor, he was retired special forces, and he was basically take some Motrin and suck it up. That was just the mentality back then. He wasn't educated on head injuries. He wasn't educated on new advances in medication. And he had given Ken, literally, no joke, almost 24 medications. And Ken just kept getting, well, him and the neurologist that we had. So they were both just dishing out the meds. And I watched Ken decline further and further and further. And I thought, this can't be head injury. Like, this whole thing can't be just a head injury. Because he came home and he was one way and he's getting worse and worse and worse. Like, this isn't making sense. So I started questioning doctors. I started looking into medications. I went to drugs.com, and you can put in all your medications and it will tell you if there's anything that counteracts with one another in the medication field. That was very important. I noticed that Ken had this advocate, me, doing all of these things, but a lot of these guys didn't have someone. And I'll never forget this time. I was at Fort Bragg Hospital, Womack Hospital at Bragg, and there was a soldier laying on the floor, curled up, crying. And I watched people stepping over him. No one stopped to ask him what was going on. Nobody said hi to him. Nobody was like, hey, are you okay, dude? Nothing like that. And so I went over there and I was like, hey, are you okay? Do you need anything? And he said that he had been waiting hours for pain medication. He had broken his foot in Afghanistan, and they had just sent him to Fort Bragg, and he was very new there. He was sent to the Warrior Transition Battalion, and nobody was helping him. And he was just laying on the floor in pain. And I thought, oh my goodness. So I kind of adopted this guy. His name's Joey Hart. And I tried to help Joey. Our family tried to help him. I met with his mom. I've talked with his sister since then. And long story short, there were a lot of Joeys. It wasn't just one Joey. So I collected resources for Ken, and I thought, I have all of these resources. I'm not going to hoard them to myself, because what we've been through, I'm very adamant about the things that you go through can be used for good, or you can keep quiet and nobody's going to get helped except for your immediate person that you're helping. So I decided that I am going to have to speak up for the underdog. Nobody else is doing it. And everybody was afraid to go to chain of command. But me, I'm a spouse. I don't care. Like, I respect the chain of command, but instead of I tried to work on a small level, but that didn't work. So I found out who's in charge of the entire Warrior Transition Battalion over the whole nation, General Cheek, and ended up having his phone number in my phone on speed dial after a while. So it was witnessing soldiers who just needed a little bit of help to get them through. And if I didn't do that, nobody was doing it at the time. So I felt like I had to do it. That's like my thing. And it also took my experience and made it much smaller than other people's experiences. So the things I was going through, the things Ken was going through, felt not as horrible because I'm helping other people. It motivated me to keep going.
That's an incredible mission, and I love that you didn't just ignore the problem, that you were there and you were jumping in and doing what you could, and you went above and beyond. And I think knowing you weren't alone in that, knowing there were others who also had family members who loved them and they were all wanting to support, but no one knew where to go, what to do. And the fact that you shared all of that work, because I'm sure it took you a long time to get that list of resources put together. It's very admirable that you did that. I think that's so important. And for the service members who, not everyone has a spouse, they're young, and like, what do you do if someone's not there to recognize the warning signs, or, hey, you just repeated this sentence, or if you forgot dinner? I feel like a lot of things could go unnoticed. So the fact that you're there noticing and saying and doing something about it is really impressive. Oh, wow. Okay. So I want to know a little bit about your podcast, because I know you said you created something for yourself. You've co-authored 3 books. So tell me a little bit about you, Patti Katter, as a professional who is out there and influencing and making the world a better place?
So I started podcasting 14 years ago, before it was even called podcasting. It was online talk radio. And I did that while Ken was deployed, actually. That was just one of the other things that I was trying to do to keep my mind off of things and to keep moving forward. But I started it for military spouses who also had someone who was deployed so that they could receive encouragement. And so I went from that to, to helping military spouses to then after Ken came home wounded, I started helping communities understand what was going on with our military in life after combat. And then I did that for several years. And a couple of years ago, it was in November or actually, I step it back a couple. So I did that with military veteran organizations, and then I decided to just start working with Adam Bird of Heroes Media Group on a show called The Decision Hour. And I did that because he was doing something similar. He was talking to heroes in the community, be it military or law enforcement or teachers or whatnot. And we were talking to all sorts of heroes about their stories and when was their decision to make things better for themselves, basically. And I was talking to Adam a lot about podcasting, and I had been podcasting for a long time. And finally, in November 2019, I was like, you know what? I want to just start my own show, and I'm going to still guest on the Decision Hour because I love it so much and I love the mission. But I want to start my own show, and I want to highlight all sorts of people that have been through trials and that they've overcome those trials, because the reality of it is our military veterans have been through traumatic events, but there's also a lot of civilians who have as well. And I'd like to just kind of connect both communities together and people as a whole, um, and just let them share their stories and let them encourage each other. And so that's kind of how my own podcast started in 2019.
That's incredible, and I love it. The Wake Up with Patti Katter. I think that's wonderful, and that you're there to spread positivity and share those stories. And I know that we talked about your mantra, overcoming trials with triumph. What was the inspiration for that? When did you decide that you wanted to adopt that way of thinking?
I think I was like 12 or 13. I remember I was riding in the car with my dad, and we were on the way to church one day. And he started saying something about one of my friends, like, she's rebellious. I grew up in a really strict Christian home. And he's like, if you would use your stubbornness for all the good to help people, this is going to work out in your favor. And I just remember at that point, I remember thinking, we all have some kind of a issue in our life, whatever it may be. Like we all have something, right? And we can either do nothing about it and let it eat us up, or we can turn it around and make a triumph of it. So it was around 12 or 13 years old that I kind of started adapting that. And yeah, here we are.
It served you well, and your grandfather was right. I love it because there has to be some level of tenacity to keep going and pushing when you probably just want to roll over and not do anything. So, how have you helped other military spouse caregivers? Because I know you said you've connected before with the organizations. Are there ways that have worked that have helped each other, lift each other up? Anything you would recommend for any military spouse caregivers who are listening right now?
Yeah, so this is kind of hard one for me because it was in 2010. I created an organization in Michigan, and it was called Voice of Warriors, and it was to educate the communities and bring them together with the veterans. And during that time, and actually even before, when we were at Fort Bragg, I had little support groups for the spouses. But really in Michigan, it was when I started digging in on a more national type volunteer basis. And it, just having coffee with another caregiver was beneficial. But then that little stubborn voice in my head started speaking again. And I thought, you know what? I don't want to be known as just a military caregiver.
Right.
And I don't want my friends that are in this situation to be known as just a military caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
And people say the word really easy, like, oh, you're a military caregiver, but they don't really think of the depth of that. Like, there's a whole lot to it. And if you're not careful, it can also box you in and not be freeing. So I started being very selective of my time with those who called themselves military caregivers. Some of them were just using that terminology, I believe, to be more negative than positive because they thought, oh, I can't go get a job because I'm a military caregiver.
Mhm.
I can't do this because I'm a military caregiver. I don't have time to work out because I'm a military caregiver. And it's like, no, you guys, like we can do these things. We just have to figure out a schedule and we have to stick to it. So I am a military caregiver, but that's not all I am. And that's not all I want you to be.
I love that. I think that's incredible. And you're so multifaceted, and it just sounds like everything you've created so much for yourself. And I think that's so important because it's not I mean, it's not just for yourself, it's for your family, it's for the community. But again, you're just that take charge kind of person who's going to go out there and make a difference. And we need more people like you. And I think it's great that you're speaking to the audience through your podcast and you're encouraging others to do the same.
Thank you.
So what is your relationship like with Ken now? Like how is he doing in his progress? How are you guys? Because I mean, I know I heard what it was like before and what it was like when he came back, which I'm sure was quite a shock to you. But now you're several years into this journey. What's it like?
Um, hmm. I don't know how else to describe this other than, when you go to a fast food restaurant and they give you a package and it has like a spoon, a knife, and a fork.
Yes.
Sometimes I feel like I have a spork instead. And I don't even know where that came from. But so you just learn to adapt and it's different. And you don't realize how different it is until you get asked a question like this because it's not a normal, it's not normal for somebody to schedule doctor appointments for somebody. It's not normal to overlook all of the household duties. It's not for one person. Because usually, if you have a married couple, you're supposed to kind of split up the duties, right? So it's been challenging, but at the plus side is, and you have to remember, like some of these spouses, they didn't have someone to come home to. They have a zero and like they have nobody. They lost their spouses. Some of our friends have lost their son. My friend Lori, she's a good friend of mine and she lost her son. She's never going to hold him again. And so you just have to remember like the good over the bad. And I don't even want to say bad. I use that loosely. But because of this entire journey that we've been on, I definitely know that I'm stronger than I have ever thought that I could be. And I am much more independent. And I like that because really, like you had mentioned on a previous show that you had, it's important for you to talk about the what ifs. Some people my age never think of that. My mom solely depended on my dad for a long time and never thought of the what ifs. So we've been forced into situations to make us think quicker
Right.
and to act faster than others.
That's a good way to say that. Yeah, as I was saying, it's so easy because in your mind you build up this idea of what the military lifestyle or what your marriage is going to look like, and sometimes life takes you in a different direction. And so we've been saying at Military Saves, like preparedness, financial readiness is very important.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about spouses having, even their own retirement accounts. Like there's a lot that could just give you peace of mind now that if you take care of it, and then if the worst case scenario does arise, you have some level of preparedness, which hopefully will bring you some comfort. So I guess that being said, now that you're where you are now, is there anything you wish you would have known or done differently in your past?
Yeah, I mean, really, I think all of us can go back there. But
Mhm.
one of the things is I plan on taking college courses as soon as Ken came home from Iraq. That never was able to happen yet.
Yeah.
And now it's okay, though. It all works itself out. It really does, because I don't really need a college education to run my podcast. I am very smart and efficient, and I can educate myself on a lot of things. So, there were things like that. Or one of the eye openers was, anybody out there listening, your military spouse typically has the life insurance, but you need to think also on the flip side, if anything were to happen to you,
Mm.
then what would happen to your veteran, or what would happen, what would happen on the flip side. So it's important to make sure that you're prepared in other ways. So, I mean, I need to have life insurance for myself. That's something I never really thought about, but now it's big, because if something happens to me, I mean, somebody's going to have to be hired to come in and help with a few things around here,
Yeah.
So there was that. I wish I had done that when I was younger, although thankfully nothing happened to me, so we didn't have to worry about that. Um, Also, when I was homeschooling, I was really, really nervous that my kids were not going to learn very much from me. But thankfully, all three of my kids are fantastic. One of them's already graduated from college. The other two are in college right now. And we have such a loving family. On a daily basis, I hear from each one of my kids. So
Oh,
not everybody can say that.
no, that's incredible. That says a lot about your relationship. I love that closeness.
Thank you.
And I can't believe you have kids in college, Patti. Like
I
you,
can't either. My birth certificate's wrong. I still stand by that.
right? I understand. Oh gosh. Well, I think these are really great advices, and of course, um, that emotional component. It sounds like you did have plans, you did have some dreams, but you've altered them, and you've managed to find gratitude. You appreciate what you do have, and you've built new dreams. And I love the fact that you have just been so proactive, and you are a voice. And like I said in the very beginning, you're a light. These are some trying situations that you're talking about, but how many people have come to you as that resource? Like, Patti will know, Patti can help us, Patti can support us. But then I also said you're a force of nature, because you get stuff done. And that is just so important. But of course, we at Military Saves come from, a financial standpoint as well. And the life insurance, that is really great advice. So the life insurance is important. Gosh, even if I could see, if you have kids and maybe you want to start saving for college when they're young, just in case, because there might not be that income that you're, relying on. The fact that you did recommend being medically retired versus medically discharged, that's something to really take note of. So really the best thing you can do is just have those conversations. What ifs? It might be a little uncomfortable discussing life insurance or, emergency savings, but it's really important, and you'll feel a lot better if you do. And then if you don't find yourself in those challenging situations, you're already set up. You've got that nice security blanket. And one of the ways that we do that with Military Saves is we encourage our community to take the Military Saves Pledge, because we do send you free resources, tips, tools, motivation to help you stay on track and reach those financial goals. But today's chat is so much more than just finances, because it is the emotional component. It is Military Appreciation Month, and I so appreciate your husband and his service. And he has served in so many ways and so many different uniforms, but you have too, Patti. Like, you have really done some amazing services, not just for your husband and your own family, but for our military community on the whole. And you're a change maker, and I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome. Well, is there anything else that you would like to add today? I've so enjoyed our time and appreciated your authenticity and your helpful resources.
I mean, I think everybody should listen to this show. I think it's really important. Finances are a huge part, especially caregivers and military veterans. Huge. And for anybody listening, for all that goes. And then also, don't hit your head over the heart, or don't hit yourself over the head too hard if you do make mistakes throughout your transition period of either retiring or getting out and going into civilian jobs, things like that. We all make mistakes, and focus on the good and what you can do to make things better.
Perfect. I think that's beautiful life advice in general. So you all heard it. Thank you so much for tuning in today to our Midday Money Chat on military caregivers. And Patti, I just want to thank you again for being our guest. You were wonderful to chat with, as I knew you would be.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Well, thank you again for your time, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.